When my daughter-in-law called me an old bitch at Richard's funeral, she had no idea she'd just sealed her own fate. What happened in the next 72 hours would destroy everything she'd spent 14 months planning. But to understand how Jessica ended up on her knees in my living room, begging for mercy she'd never shown me, I need to take you back to the morning my world fell apart. Richard died at 6:23 on a Tuesday morning in October, 47 years of marriage, and he slipped away while I was in the hospital bathroom washing my face. The nurses said it was peaceful, that he just stopped breathing. But there was nothing peaceful about the hole his absence left in my chest. I was still sitting beside his body, holding his hand that was already growing cold, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "David's too upset to handle arrangements. I'm taking charge. Be home by noon for planning meeting." Not, "I'm sorry for your loss." Not, "How are you holding up?" Just a command, like I was her employee instead of the mother who'd raised the man she married. But grief makes you question everything, including your own reactions. Maybe she was just trying to help. Maybe David really was too emotional, and Jessica was stepping up to support our family. Maybe I was reading too much into the tone because I was drowning in my own pain. I drove home in a fog, still wearing the clothes I'd slept in at the hospital. Our house felt impossibly empty. Richard's coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter where he'd left it Monday morning, still containing the last sip he'd never finished. His reading glasses were folded beside Tuesday's newspaper, opened to the crossword puzzle he'd been working on before the pain got too bad. Jessica's car was already in my driveway when I pulled up. She had a key, of course. David had given her one after they married 3 years ago. But something about seeing her silver BMW sitting where Richard's old Ford pickup should have been made my stomach clench. She was waiting in my living room, laptop open on my coffee table, surrounded by papers and brochures. Phone pressed to her ear, speaking in the crisp, efficient tone she used at her marketing job. "Yes, Friday works perfectly," she was saying. "Morrison Funeral Home, 2:00 service, reception to follow. Simple ceremony, nothing elaborate." Friday. Richard had died 6 hours ago, and she was already scheduling his funeral. "I'll call you back with final head count." She hung up and looked at me with the kind of sympathetic expression people practice in mirrors. "Dorothy, honey, sit down. I've taken care of everything." I remained standing in my own doorway. Taken care of what exactly? All the arrangements, the funeral home, flowers, catering for the reception. "I know how overwhelming this must be for you." She gestured to the chair like she was inviting me to sit in my own home. "I've scheduled everything for Friday afternoon. Quick service, then we can all start healing." Friday, 3 days away. That seems fast. Trust me, dragging it out just makes the pain worse. Better to get closure quickly. She pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "I've also been in touch with Richard's attorney about estate matters. We'll want to handle the legal side immediately after the service." The word "we" hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't see yet. "David's okay with all this?" "David's devastated, Dorothy. He can barely function right now. Someone needs to be the strong one for this family." She arranged papers on my coffee table with the precision of someone accustomed to taking control. "I've made all the decisions I know Richard would want." That's when she said it. The thing that should have been my first real warning. "I told Morrisons that Richard wanted cremation. He always talked about how peaceful it would be, returning to the earth as ashes." My blood went cold. Richard was terrified of fire. Had been since childhood, when he'd barely escaped a house fire that killed his pet dog. He'd made me promise years ago that when his time came, he wanted to be buried in the ground where I could visit him, where he could rest in peace, not burning. But grief makes you doubt your own memories. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the pain was making me remember things differently. Maybe Richard had changed his mind and never told me. "Are you sure that's what he wanted?" I asked carefully. Jessica's expression shifted for just a moment. Something flickered behind her eyes that looked almost like calculation. But then the sympathetic mask was back in place. Of course I'm sure. He mentioned it just last month when we were talking about his situation. He said he didn't want you to have the burden of maintaining a gravesite. Her voice carried the gentle confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. He was thinking of you, Dorothy, even at the end. But Richard had never called his cancer a situation. He'd called it what it was, the bastard that was trying to steal our last years together. I sat down heavily in my chair, the one Richard had bought me for my 60th birthday because it was exactly the right height for my feet to touch the floor. Jessica's papers were spread across the coffee table where Richard and I used to do crossword puzzles together every Sunday morning. "Where's David now?" I asked. "At home, trying to process everything. I thought it was better to handle the arrangements myself rather than put him through this stress." She pulled out more documents. "I've also contacted your insurance company about the life insurance policy. They'll need these forms completed, but I can handle that too." Life insurance. We were talking about life insurance while Richard's body was still warm in a hospital bed. "Jessica, I appreciate you wanting to help, but maybe we should slow down. Dorothy." Her voice carried a note of gentle firmness, like a teacher correcting a confused student. "I know this is hard, but delaying things won't bring Richard back. The sooner we handle the practical matters, the sooner you can focus on grieving properly." She made it sound so reasonable, so caring. But something in my chest was pulling tight, like a string being wound around my ribs. "The funeral is Friday then?" "Friday at 2. Morrison's Chapel, the small one." I thought intimate would be more appropriate than trying to fill their main sanctuary. She closed her laptop with a decisive click. "I'll pick you up at 1:30. Wear something appropriate. Richard would want you to look dignified." The way she said dignified made me feel like she thought I might not know how to dress myself for my own husband's funeral. After she left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the sudden silence. The house felt different now. Not just empty because Richard was gone, but violated somehow. Like someone had rearranged furniture in my soul when I wasn't looking. I picked up Richard's reading glasses from beside the newspaper. His fingerprints were still on the lenses. Tomorrow, someone would probably tell me I should clean them, put them away, move on. But something Jessica had said was bothering me. Something about how Richard would want me to look dignified. Richard had never cared about dignity. He'd married me in a courthouse wearing jeans because we couldn't afford a fancy wedding. He'd loved me when I had morning sickness and couldn't keep food down for 3 months. He'd held my hand while I cried over every miscarriage, every disappointment, every fear that life had thrown at us. Richard had loved me exactly as I was. He'd never once suggested I needed to be more dignified. But Jessica had made it sound like she knew what Richard wanted better than I did. I spent that night in our bed, surrounded by the smell of Richard's pillow, trying to understand why everything Jessica had said felt wrong. She was being helpful. She was taking care of arrangements I didn't have the strength to handle. She was protecting David from additional stress during his grief. So why did I feel like I was being erased? But what I didn't know then was that Jessica had been planning this conversation for months. Every word, every gesture, every sympathetic expression had been rehearsed. Because while I was sitting in a hospital room watching my husband die, Jessica was already calculating how long it would take to steal everything we'd built together. The cremation wasn't about Richard's wishes. It was about destroying evidence. And Friday's funeral wouldn't be a celebration of Richard's life. It would be the first public step in completely destroying mine. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of October day that makes you want to crawl back under warm covers and pretend the world doesn't exist. I stood in my closet, staring at clothes that suddenly felt like costumes for a play I didn't want to perform in. I chose the blue dress with small white flowers that Richard had always loved. The one he'd bought me for our 40th anniversary because he said it made my eyes look like they did when we first met. It was the last dress he'd seen me wear to something special. Our neighbor's golden anniversary party just 2 months ago, before the cancer got aggressive. If I was going to say goodbye to my husband, I wanted to wear something that reminded me of how he saw me. Something that honored the love we'd shared. When Jessica arrived to pick me up, her reaction was immediate and brutal. "Jesus, Dorothy, you look like an old bitch in that thing." The words hit me like a physical slap. I was standing in my own doorway, grieving my husband of 47 years, and my daughter-in-law had just called me an old bitch, out loud, where the neighbors could hear. My face burned with humiliation, but before I could respond, she continued with that tone people use when they're explaining something obvious to someone slow. "Richard would want you to look elegant today, not like you're dressed for a garden party. Don't you have something in black? More funeral appropriate?" The elderly woman across the street was watering her flowers, but I could see her glancing over. She'd heard. They'd all heard. "This was Richard's favorite dress," I managed to say, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "Richard's not here to see it." Jessica's tone was gentle now, like she was comforting a confused child. "Come on, let's find you something more suitable. We don't want people talking." But people were already talking. The way she'd said it, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear, had made sure of that. I changed into a black dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral 10 years ago. It made me look washed out and older than my 68 years, but Jessica nodded approvingly as I got into her car. Much better. Richard would be proud. The ride to Morrison Funeral Home was silent except for Jessica's phone calls organizing reception details. She spoke in her professional voice, efficient and in control, while I sat in the passenger seat of my own life wondering when I'd become a passenger in my own life. The service was small, as Jessica had promised. About 40 people, friends from church, Richard's old colleagues, neighbors who'd known us for decades. David sat in the front row beside Jessica, his face red and swollen from crying. When I tried to take his hand, Jessica somehow positioned herself between us, rubbing his shoulder and whispering comfort I couldn't hear. Pastor Williams gave a lovely eulogy about Richard's 45 years as a high school math teacher, about his patience with struggling students and his dry sense of humor. But every few minutes, I found myself distracted by Jessica's performance, because that's what it was. A performance. She dabbed at her eyes with tissues at all the appropriate moments. She squeezed David's hand when Pastor Williams talked about Richard's devotion to family. She even managed a brave smile when someone shared a funny story about Richard's terrible jokes. But I caught the moments between the performance, the split seconds when she thought no one was looking and her face went completely blank. No grief, no sadness, no loss, just nothing. Like someone who'd turned off the television between shows. After the service, during the reception at Morrison's family room, I overheard part of a conversation that made my blood freeze. "Such a blessing that Jessica's handling everything," Mrs. Patterson from church was saying to another woman. "Poor Dorothy seems so confused by it all. Grief affects people differently, I suppose." Confused. I was confused. Not bereaved, not heartbroken. Confused. Like I was some elderly woman who couldn't handle basic decisions, rather than someone who'd just lost her life partner. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment away from the sympathy and the whispered conversations about my apparent incompetence. In the hallway, I heard Jessica's voice coming from the funeral director's office. "Yes, cremation, as we discussed. The family wants it handled quickly. Mrs. Henderson is having trouble processing everything right now, so I'm managing the arrangements." Through the partially open door, I could see her signing papers with the confident strokes of someone accustomed to making important decisions. But Richard wasn't supposed to be cremated. He was supposed to be buried in Greenwood Cemetery, in the plot we'd purchased together 15 years ago. The plot where he'd told me he wanted to rest so I could visit him whenever I missed him too much. When I returned to the reception, People kept approaching me with that careful tone reserved for the elderly and unstable. "Jessica's such a treasure, taking care of everything for you. You're so lucky to have a daughter-in-law who's so capable. David chose well when he married someone so responsible." Each comment felt like another small erasure of my competence, my role in my own family, my right to grieve my husband the way I needed to. But the worst was yet to come. As the reception was winding down, Jessica appeared at my elbow with a manila folder and a man in an expensive suit I didn't recognize. "Dorothy, I'd like you to meet Attorney Brennan. He was Richard's lawyer for some estate planning Richard had been working on." I shook the man's hand, confused. "I thought Bill Morrison handled our legal matters." "For simpler things, yes," Brennan replied smoothly. "But Richard contacted our firm about some more complex estate planning. Trusts, tax implications, that sort of thing. Very wise of him, given the size of his assets." Assets. Richard was a high school teacher for 45 years. What assets could possibly require complex estate planning? "I'm not sure I understand." "Richard was very concerned about making sure everything was handled properly after his passing," Jessica interjected. "Attorney Brennan has some documents he needs to discuss with you." "Perhaps we could schedule a meeting next week," I suggested. "Today seems—" "Actually," Brennan said, his tone gently insistent, "time is somewhat of a factor here. Some of these matters need to be filed within specific timeframes. If we could just step into the director's office for a few minutes." Something about the way they were both looking at me, expectant, slightly impatient, made my stomach churn. But I was tired, overwhelmed, and everyone kept telling me how lucky I was to have people handling things for me. In the funeral director's office, Brennan spread several documents across the desk while Jessica stood behind my chair like a supportive daughter. "Richard executed a new will about 6 months ago," Brennan explained, pointing to a document with Richard's signature at the bottom. "He was very specific about his wishes for the distribution of his estate." I stared at the papers, trying to process words that seemed to blur together. Estate distribution, beneficiary designations, trust structures. "I don't understand. We made our wills together years ago. Everything was supposed to come to me, then to David when I die." "Plans change," Jessica said softly, her hand touching my shoulder in what anyone watching would interpret as comfort. "Richard was worried about the tax implications of leaving everything directly to you. This new arrangement protects more of the inheritance for David's future." The will was 12 pages long, full of legal language I couldn't parse in my grief-fogged state. But I could understand the summary Brennan provided. The house would go into a trust managed by David and Jessica. I could live there as long as I was competent to maintain the property. Richard's retirement accounts would transfer to David. His life insurance would go to David and Jessica for family expenses and mortgage obligations. I would receive a small monthly allowance from the trust, an allowance from my own husband's estate. "This doesn't seem right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's complicated," Brennan replied in the patient tone used with confused elderly people. Richard was very thoughtful about minimizing tax burden and ensuring long-term family security. He wanted to make sure David and Jessica could provide for their growing family. Growing family? I looked at Jessica, who placed a protective hand over her flat stomach. "We haven't told anyone yet, but we're expecting." Richard was so excited about becoming a grandfather. A baby. They were having a baby, and Richard had never mentioned it. Richard, who called me every day during his lunch break just to hear my voice. Richard, who told me about every student's progress and every colleague's personal drama. Richard, who shared every hope and worry with me for 47 years. He'd never mentioned that Jessica was pregnant. He'd never mentioned changing our will. He'd never mentioned any of this. "I need to think about this," I said, standing abruptly. "Of course," Brennan said smoothly, but his eyes showed a flicker of annoyance. But I do need to emphasize the time-sensitive nature of some of these filings. Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up meeting for Monday morning, just to handle the immediate paperwork. Monday, 4 days after my husband's death, and they wanted me to sign away my life. "I'll call you," I said, gathering my purse. Jessica followed me into the hallway. "Dorothy, I know this is overwhelming, but Richard spent months working on this plan. He wanted to make sure you were protected, that you wouldn't have to worry about managing everything alone." Protected? Like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with scissors. Why didn't he tell me about any of this? He didn't want to worry you while he was sick. You had enough to deal with. Her voice carried that gentle, reasonable tone that made my doubts sound like paranoia. "Richard loved you so much, Dorothy. Everything he did was to take care of you." But as I drove home alone, Jessica had stayed behind to handle final details. I kept thinking about that will, about the language that made me a recipient of charity, rather than the wife who'd built this life alongside my husband. About the pregnancy Richard had never mentioned. About the cremation he'd supposedly requested. About the dress I'd chosen to honor our love, and how Jessica had called me an old bitch for wearing it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, one thing was crystallizing in my mind with uncomfortable clarity. Either my husband of 47 years had become a stranger in his final months, making major life decisions without telling me, or someone was lying. And if someone was lying, I needed to find out who. Because if I'd learned anything in my 68 years, it was this. When something feels wrong, it usually is. The question was whether I had the strength to prove it. That night, I sat in Richard's study surrounded by 47 years of our life together. Bank statements, insurance policies, old tax returns, everything organized in the meticulous filing system Richard had maintained since we were newlyweds. If Richard had spent months working on a new will, if he'd made major changes to our estate planning, there would be traces of it somewhere in these files. I started with the most recent documents, working backward through the year. Credit card statements showing payments to our regular attorney, Bill Morrison. Medical bills. Utility payments. Nothing to Attorney Brennan's firm. Nothing about complex estate planning or trust structures. But then I found something that made my hand shake. In Richard's desk drawer, behind a folder of old warranty documents, was a manila envelope labeled "Dorothy Important Documents" in Richard's careful handwriting. Inside was our original will, dated 12 years ago. The will I remembered, where everything went to me first, then to David. But there was also a handwritten note from Richard, dated just 3 months ago. "Dorothy, if anything happens to me, this is our real will, the one we made together. Don't let anyone tell you different. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. R." My vision blurred with tears. Richard had known. Somehow he'd known that someone might try to challenge our original will, and he'd left me proof. But there was more. Clipped to the will was a bank statement I'd never seen before. An account at First National Bank in Richard's name only, containing nearly $200,000. Money I didn't know existed. Money that wasn't mentioned in either will. And there was a life insurance policy, our original policy with Mutual Life, the one we'd maintained for 20 years. The one that named me as the sole beneficiary for $500,000. Not David and Jessica. Me. I spent the next hour cross-referencing documents, and slowly, a picture emerged that was completely different from what Attorney Brennan had presented. The will Brennan had shown me was dated 6 months ago, but I had credit card statements showing that Richard was in intensive care at the hospital 6 months ago, barely conscious from pain medication. There was no way he could have been meeting with lawyers or making complex estate decisions. The life insurance policy Jessica had mentioned was real, but it was a newer policy I'd never heard of. A policy that had been purchased just 8 months ago, when Richard was already too sick to make rational financial decisions. Someone had been manipulating a dying man. and I was starting to understand who. The next morning, I called David. "I need to talk to you about your father's will." "Mom," Jessica explained everything to me. "Dad was just trying to protect you from having to manage everything alone." "David, I found our original will, the real one, and I think someone has been lying to all of us." There was a long pause. When David spoke again, his voice was careful. "What do you mean? Can you come over? I want to show you what I found." I'll have to check with Jessica. She had some errands planned." "Since when did my 36-year-old son need to check with his wife before visiting his recently widowed mother?" "David, this is important. Your father left me a message." Another pause. "I'll be over in an hour." When David arrived, he looked haggard. Grief, I thought. He'd always been close to his father. But as I spread the documents across the kitchen table, our original will, Richard's note, the bank statements, I watched David's face carefully. He read Richard's handwritten note twice, his finger tracing the words like he was trying to decode a foreign language. "This doesn't make sense," he said finally. "Dad met with Attorney Brennan multiple times. Jessica drove him to those appointments because you were at work." "What appointments?" "David, your father was barely conscious 6 months ago. I was with him at the hospital almost every day." "No, Mom. Earlier than that. Last year, before he got really bad. Jessica said Dad was concerned about taxes and protecting the estate." Jessica said. Everything came back to what Jessica had said. "David, look at these bank statements. This account with $200,000. Did you know about it?" He studied the papers, frowning. "No, but Dad always handled the finances. Maybe he was saving money and didn't want to worry you about it." "And this life insurance policy?" I showed him the original mutual life policy. "This says I'm the beneficiary for $500,000, but Attorney Brennan said the life insurance was going to you and Jessica." David's frown deepened. That's not what Jessica told me." "What exactly did Jessica tell you?" "That Dad had changed everything to protect you from tax problems and to make sure I could take care of you properly. That you'd get a monthly allowance, but that the big decisions would be handled by us. Us, David and Jessica, not David and me." "Honey, does this sound like something your father would do? Leave me dependent on monthly allowances instead of trusting me to manage our money?" For the first time since Richard's death, I saw doubt flicker across David's face. Jessica said you'd been getting confused lately, forgetting things. She was worried about you handling complex financial decisions." "What things? What have I forgotten?" David looked uncomfortable. She said you forgot about Dad's doctor appointments sometimes, and that you'd been repeating yourself in conversations." I stared at my son, feeling ice form in my chest. "David, I never forgot your father's appointments. I drove him to every single one. And I don't repeat myself in conversations." "But Jessica said a lot of things, apparently." I gathered the documents back into a neat pile. "David, I want you to really think about this. When did Jessica start saying I was getting confused?" He was quiet for a long time. "I guess maybe around the time Dad got sicker. She was just worried about you, Mom. She loves you." Love. If this was love, I'd hate to see what Jessica considered indifference. "I think we need to take these documents to a lawyer, our lawyer, Bill Morrison." "Mom, maybe we should talk to Jessica first. She understands the legal stuff better than we do. Why would we need to talk to Jessica about my husband's will?" The question hung in the air between us. David shifted uncomfortably, like someone who'd realized he'd said something wrong but wasn't sure what. "She's been handling everything," he said finally. "I just thought, she's been handling everything because she convinced everyone I couldn't. But I'm not confused, David. I'm not incompetent. And I'm not going to let someone steal 47 years of your father's and my life together. David stood up, agitation clear in his movements. Mom, I think grief is making you paranoid. Jessica isn't trying to steal anything. She's trying to help. Then why didn't your father tell me about any of these new arrangements? Why was I surprised by everything at the funeral? Because he didn't want to upset you while he was dying. The words came out louder than David had intended. He immediately looked embarrassed, like a child who'd lost his temper. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to yell. It's just, this is all so hard, and Jessica's been so strong, so helpful. I don't know what I would have done without her. I looked at my son, my boy who'd grown into a man I was proud of, who'd inherited his father's kindness and his grandfather's work ethic, and I saw something that broke my heart. He was exhausted, overwhelmed by grief, and completely dependent on his wife to navigate this crisis. And Jessica had positioned herself as his only support system, while simultaneously undermining his confidence in me. David, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. What? Don't tell Jessica about these documents. Not yet. His face immediately showed conflict. Mom, I can't lie to my wife. I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to let me verify these things with Bill Morrison before we involve anyone else. If I'm wrong, if these documents don't mean what I think they mean, then we'll include Jessica in the conversation. And if you're right, then we'll deal with that together, as a family. David was quiet for a long time, staring at the papers spread across the table. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but just until you talk to Mr. Morrison. I don't want to keep secrets from Jessica. I understand. After David left, I sat in my kitchen feeling something I hadn't felt since Richard's death. Hope. I had evidence. I had our original will, Richard's note, proof of accounts and policies that Jessica either didn't know about or had chosen not to mention. I had my son's agreement to let me investigate before making any major decisions. For the first time in 4 days, I felt like I might actually be able to protect what Richard and I had built together. But what I didn't know was that David was already texting Jessica before he'd even reached his car. What I didn't know was that Jessica had been monitoring my activities, waiting for exactly this moment. What I didn't know was that my decision to trust my son would be the biggest mistake I could have made. Because by Monday morning, Jessica would know everything I'd discovered, and she'd be ready to destroy me completely. Monday morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes after a storm. I had a plan. Call Bill Morrison, schedule an appointment to review Richard's real will, and get legal advice about challenging whatever fraudulent documents Attorney Brennan was trying to push through. I was reaching for the phone when it rang. Dorothy, it's Attorney Brennan. I hope you're feeling better this morning. The presumption in his voice, that I'd been feeling unwell rather than simply overwhelmed, immediately put me on edge. I'm fine, thank you. Excellent. I wanted to follow up on our conversation Friday. I know you needed time to process everything, but as I mentioned, some of these matters are time-sensitive. Actually, I'd like to have my attorney review the documents before I sign anything. There was a pause. Your attorney? Bill Morrison. He's handled our legal matters for 15 years. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Henderson, I should mention that Richard specifically asked me not to involve Mr. Morrison in these matters. He felt that Morrison's limited estate planning experience might complicate things. Limited experience. Bill Morrison had been practicing law for 30 years. I'd still like him to review everything. Of course, that's your right. But I should warn you that delays could jeopardize some of the tax advantages Richard worked so hard to establish. The IRS has very specific filing deadlines. Fear tactics. I'd heard enough of them in my life to recognize the technique. I'm willing to take that risk. I see. His tone had shifted from gentle persuasion to something cooler. Well, perhaps we could schedule a meeting for later this week then. Thursday afternoon? I'll call you back after I've spoken with Mr. Morrison. After I hung up, I immediately dialed Bill Morrison's office. His secretary, Martha, had known Richard and me for years. Dorothy, honey, I'm so sorry about Richard. Such a wonderful man. Thank you, Martha. I need to schedule an appointment with Bill as soon as possible. There are some legal matters I need to discuss. Of course. Let me check his calendar. I can fit you in tomorrow at 10. Will that work? Perfect. I spent the rest of Monday organizing documents and making notes about the inconsistencies I'd found. By evening, I felt prepared and cautiously optimistic. Then David called. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I need to tell you something. Something in his tone made my stomach clench. What is it? I told Jessica about the documents you found. The world seemed to tilt sideways. David, I asked you not to. I know, but I couldn't keep secrets from my wife. And Mom, she explained everything. She said she was worried this might happen. She was worried about what? About you finding Dad's old papers and getting confused about the timeline. She said grief sometimes makes people think old documents are more recent than they actually are. The condescension in that explanation made my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady. David, the documents are clearly dated. Richard's note to me was written 3 months ago. Jessica said Dad might have been confused when he wrote that note. The cancer medications, you know. They can affect judgment. Every response had an explanation. Every piece of evidence I'd found had been anticipated and dismissed. Almost like Jessica had been preparing for this conversation. She also said you might try to use those old documents to challenge Dad's real will. She's worried you're not thinking clearly. Not thinking clearly. The same phrase Jessica had used about David being too upset to handle funeral arrangements. David, I'm meeting with Bill Morrison tomorrow to review everything. Why don't you come with me? I can't. Jessica scheduled a meeting with Attorney Brennan for tomorrow morning. She said we need to get the estate paperwork filed before you do something that could mess up Dad's careful planning. They were moving fast. Too fast. David, please, just come with me to see Bill Morrison first. If I'm wrong about everything, we can still meet with Brennan later. Mom, Jessica's already arranged everything. She took time off work to handle this. I can't just cancel on her. Jessica had taken time off work. Jessica had arranged everything. Jessica. When had my son started needing his wife's permission to support his grieving mother? After David hung up, I sat in my living room feeling more alone than I had since Richard died. My son, the boy I'd raised, the man Richard had been so proud of, was choosing his wife over his mother. Not because he didn't love me, but because Jessica had convinced him that supporting her was the same as protecting me. But I wasn't ready to give up. Tuesday morning, I arrived at Bill Morrison's office carrying a folder full of documents and a legal pad covered with questions. Bill was a kind man in his 60s who'd guided Richard and me through buying our first house, setting up our wills, and handling my mother's estate when she passed. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it would be Bill. Dorothy, first let me say how sorry I am about Richard. He was a good man. Thank you, Bill. I need your help understanding some legal documents. I spread everything across his conference table. The original will, Richard's note, the bank statements, the insurance policies, and the new will Attorney Brennan had presented. Bill studied everything carefully, occasionally asking questions about dates and circumstances. After 20 minutes, he sat back with a grim expression. Dorothy, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Okay. Did Richard ever mention wanting to change your will? Never. We talked about updating it when David got married, but Richard wanted to keep it simple. Everything to me, then to David, when I die. And this account at First National Bank, did you know Richard had opened it? Not until I found the statements. $200,000 I never knew existed. Bill picked up the new will and examined the signature page closely. This signature. It looks like Richard's handwriting, but something feels off about it. What do you mean? The pressure, the line quality. Richard had very distinctive handwriting. I've seen his signature on dozens of documents over the years. This looks practiced, like someone copied it very carefully. My heart started pounding. Are you saying it's forged? I'm saying I have concerns about its authenticity, especially given the timeline. You said Richard was hospitalized 6 months ago? Intensive care for 3 weeks. He was barely conscious most of the time. And this will is dated during that period. Bill shook his head. Dorothy, I think someone has been manipulating your husband's estate, and I think they've been planning it for a long time. The relief I felt at having my suspicions validated was immediately overwhelmed by rage. Someone had been manipulating my dying husband. Someone had been stealing from us while I was focused on caring for Richard and trying to make his last months as comfortable as possible. What can we do? First, we need to file the original will for probate immediately. Establish your legal rights before anyone else can take action. Second, we need to report the suspicious activity to the probate court and request an investigation. What about the life insurance? Contact the insurance company today. Inform them that there may be fraudulent claims being made and that you're the legitimate beneficiary. I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in days. How long will this take? If we move quickly and the evidence is as clear as it appears, we should be able to resolve this within a few weeks. But Dorothy, I need to warn you. Whoever is behind this isn't going to give up easily. They've invested too much effort to walk away quietly. What does that mean? It means they're going to try to discredit you, question your competence, your memory, your ability to understand complex legal matters. They're going to make this as difficult as possible. As if on cue, my phone rang. Jessica. Dorothy, David told me you're meeting with Bill Morrison today. I wish you'd talk to us first. The possessive plural, us, wasn't lost on me. I'm reviewing my legal options, Jessica. I understand you're grieving, but David and I are worried you're about to make some serious mistakes. Attorney Brennan called this morning. He said you're planning to challenge Richard's will. I'm planning to probate the correct will. Dorothy, honey, I know this is confusing, but Richard spent months working with Attorney Brennan on estate planning. The will you found in his desk is old, outdated. He replaced it for very good reasons. Every word was delivered with gentle concern, like she was talking to a confused elderly woman. Jessica, I'd prefer to discuss this with David present. David's at work, but he asked me to handle this. He's worried about you, Dorothy. We both are. Worried about what, exactly? About you making decisions that could hurt the family financially. About you challenging legal documents you don't fully understand. About you... She paused, like she was choosing her words carefully. About you what? About your memory, Dorothy. You've been forgetting things. Important things. David's noticed it, and so have I. There it was. The accusation I'd been dreading. I haven't forgotten anything, Jessica. Honey, you forgot about Richard's doctor's appointment last month. You asked me 3 times in one conversation when the funeral was scheduled. You couldn't remember where you'd put your car keys yesterday when David was visiting. None of that was true. Not one word. Jessica, I never forgot Richard's appointments. I drove him to every single one. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Dorothy. You're remembering things that didn't happen. The gaslighting was so smooth, so confident, that for a moment I almost questioned myself. But Bill Morrison was sitting across from me, having just confirmed that my instincts were correct. I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetting things. I was being systematically lied to. I have to go, Jessica. Dorothy, please don't do anything rash. For Richard's sake, for David's sake, for the sake of your grandchild. She hung up before I could ask what grandchild she was talking about. I looked at Bill, who'd heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "She's good," he said grimly. "Professional-level manipulation." "What do you mean?" "The way she's using your son as leverage, questioning your competence without directly accusing you, creating urgency around decisions that benefit her. This isn't amateur hour, Dorothy. Someone taught her these techniques." That afternoon, I returned home to find David's car in my driveway. He was waiting in my living room with Jessica and a woman I didn't recognize. "Mom, this is Dr. Patricia Wells. She's a geriatric psychiatrist." My blood went cold. "I don't need a psychiatrist." "Dorothy," Dr. Wells said in a professionally warm voice, "I understand you've been under tremendous stress since your husband's passing. Your family is concerned about some memory issues and decision-making difficulties you've been experiencing." "I haven't been experiencing any memory issues." "That's very common," Dr. Wells continued. "Often, patients with early cognitive decline aren't aware of their symptoms. Family members are usually the first to notice changes." Jessica spoke up. "We're just worried about you, Dorothy. Some of the things you've been saying lately, they don't match reality." "What things?" "Like insisting Richard never wanted to be cremated when he specifically requested it. Like claiming you never knew about his meetings with Attorney Brennan when David drove him there multiple times. Like finding old documents and thinking they're recent." David looked uncomfortable but nodded along with Jessica's recitation. "Your family loves you very much," Dr. Wells said. "They just want to make sure you're getting the help you need to process your grief in a healthy way." I looked at the three people in my living room, my son, my daughter-in-law, and a psychiatrist I'd never met, and I realized what was happening. This wasn't a wellness check. This was an intervention, and the goal wasn't to help me. The goal was to establish medical documentation that I was incompetent to handle my own affairs. "I want you all to leave my house," I said quietly. "Mom," David started. "Now." Dr. Wells looked at Jessica. "Sometimes patients become agitated when confronted with their symptoms. It's a normal part of the process." Agitated. Like my anger at being ambushed in my own home was evidence of mental illness, rather than a rational response to being attacked. "I'm calling the police if you don't leave." "Dorothy," Jessica said, "we're just trying to help." But as they gathered their things and headed for the door, I caught something that made my blood freeze. Dr. Wells handed Jessica a business card and said quietly, "Call me tomorrow. We'll discuss next steps." Next steps. They weren't giving up. This was just the beginning. And as I watched them leave, I realized something that terrified me more than losing Richard's estate or being declared incompetent. My own son was helping them do it. David, the boy I'd raised, the man Richard had been so proud of, was actively participating in a plan to destroy me. But what none of them knew was that in trying to prove I was incompetent, they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because for 32 years, I'd made my living catching people who thought they could manipulate systems and destroy evidence, and now it was time to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. That night, I sat in Richard's study looking at myself in the reflection of his computer screen, and I made a decision that would change everything. For 32 years, before I retired to take care of Richard during his illness, I had worked as a senior forensic accountant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I had built cases against mob accountants, international money launderers, and sophisticated financial criminals who thought they were smarter than the law. I had spent 3 decades catching people who believed they could manipulate systems, forge documents, and steal money without consequences. And now, someone had made the fatal mistake of trying to run a con on me. The Vulnerable Widow Act was over. It was time to remind Jessica and her accomplices exactly who they were dealing with. I powered up Richard's computer and began to work. First, I ran a comprehensive background check on Jessica Marie Thompson Henderson. Not the casual Google search a normal person might do, but the kind of deep-dive investigation I'd conducted hundreds of times for federal cases. What I found made my blood run cold. Jessica hadn't been born Jessica Thompson. She'd been born Jennifer Thompson in Phoenix, Arizona, 34 years ago. She'd legally changed her name to Jessica when she moved to our state 3 years ago, just 6 months before she met David. She'd been married before, twice. Both husbands had died within 5 years of marriage. Both had left substantial life insurance policies that Jessica had collected. The first husband, Michael Foster, had died in a hiking accident in Colorado. Fell off a cliff while hiking alone. No witnesses. Jessica inherited $300,000 in life insurance. The second husband, Robert Chen, had died of what appeared to be a heart attack at age 38. No previous history of heart problems. Jessica inherited $450,000 in life insurance and his house. 2 dead husbands. $750,000 in life insurance payouts. And now she was working on husband number 3. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found when I dug deeper into Robert Chen's death. There had been an investigation. A very quiet investigation by the Denver Police Department, initiated by Robert's sister who suspected foul play. The investigation had been closed after 6 months with no charges filed, but the detective's notes, which I accessed through federal law enforcement databases I still had clearance for, told a disturbing story. Robert had been planning to divorce Jessica. He'd contacted a divorce attorney 2 weeks before his death. He'd been concerned about Jessica's spending habits and had discovered that she'd taken out a life insurance policy on him without his knowledge. The detective had suspected poisoning but couldn't prove it. The medical examiner had ruled the death natural causes, but noted some irregularities in the toxicology report that were consistent with certain undetectable poisons. Jessica was a serial killer, and David was her next target. But first, she had to eliminate me and gain control of Richard's estate. $4.5 million would keep her comfortable while she planned David's accident. Now I understood the timeline. Now I understood why she'd insisted on cremation. It would destroy any evidence of what Richard had really died from. Now I understood why she'd rushed the funeral and the estate proceedings. But Jessica had made one critical error in her planning. She'd assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be, a grieving widow with no resources and no expertise. She had no idea that for 3 decades, I'd specialized in unraveling financial crimes committed by people who thought they were too smart to get caught. I spent the next 4 hours building a comprehensive case file. I documented every inconsistency in the forged will. I traced the money trail showing how the fraudulent life insurance policy had been purchased. I identified the co-conspirators in Attorney Brennan's firm who specialized in elder fraud. I even found Dr. Wells's pattern of providing paid psychiatric evaluations to support guardianship proceedings. But most importantly, I found the smoking gun that would destroy them all. When I traced the money used to pay for the forged will and fraudulent insurance policy, I discovered it had come from an account belonging to Attorney Brennan's firm, an account that had received deposits from 12 other suspicious estate cases over the past 2 years. Cases involving elderly clients who had died within months of changing their wills. Cases where the new wills had remarkably similar language and structure. Cases where the same group of witnesses had signed the documents. Jessica wasn't just a serial killer. She was part of a criminal organization that specialized in systematic elder fraud and murder. And I had just uncovered the largest inheritance fraud ring in the state's history. By Wednesday morning, I was ready to make my move. I called Agent Sarah Martinez at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Sarah had been my protege when I was still working, and she'd risen to become one of the Bureau's top investigators. Dorothy. My God, I heard about Richard. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Sarah. I need to discuss something with you, something professional. Of course, what's going on? I've uncovered what appears to be a systematic inheritance fraud operation. Multiple victims, forged documents, and I suspect several murders made to look like natural deaths. There was a pause. Dorothy, are you working a case? I'm the target, Sarah. They killed my husband, and now they're trying to steal our estate and eliminate me. Jesus, How certain are you about this? Certain enough to stake my professional reputation on it. I've compiled a complete case file with financial evidence, document analysis, and victim pattern identification. I need bureau resources to confirm the murders and arrest the network. Can you come in today? I'll be there in 2 hours. As I gathered my evidence files, my phone rang. Jessica. Dorothy, we need to talk. Can I come over? I'm busy today, Jessica. It's important. It's about David. My blood went cold. What about David? He's been having some chest pains. Nothing serious, probably just stress from everything that's happened. But I'm taking him to the doctor this afternoon. Chest pains, just like Robert Chen. Which doctor? Dr. Harrison at the cardiac clinic? David insisted on going to someone who doesn't know the family. He doesn't want to worry you. Every word was calculated. Every detail designed to keep me away from David while Jessica implemented the next phase of her plan. I want to go with you. Dorothy, that's sweet, but David specifically asked me not to tell you. He doesn't want you to worry over nothing. Jessica, I'm his mother. And I'm his wife, the person who's responsible for his health care now. The possessiveness in her voice was chilling. She'd already started the process of isolating David from his support system, just like she'd done with Richard. I'll call David myself. He's at work and can't take calls. Dorothy, I promise I'll take good care of him, just like I took care of Richard. The way she said it, just like I took care of Richard, sent ice through my veins. Jessica, I want to see my son. And you will, after we figure out what's wrong with his heart. After. Always after. After the funeral, after the will reading, after the medical evaluation, after it was too late to change anything. I have to go, Dorothy. David's expecting me. She hung up, and I immediately tried calling David's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried his work number. His secretary said he'd called in sick. David was already with Jessica, and I was running out of time. I grabbed my case files and headed for the FBI field office, but as I reached my car, I realized I was being watched. A black sedan was parked across the street, engine running. 2 men in suits. They'd been there when I came home last night, and they were still there this morning. Jessica's surveillance team. They were monitoring my movements, reporting back on my activities, making sure I didn't do anything that could interfere with their timeline. But what they didn't know was that I'd spent 32 years teaching federal agents how to conduct surveillance operations, and I'd spent just as long learning how to evade them. I drove to the shopping center near my house, parked at the grocery store, and went inside. I walked through the store to the back exit, which opened onto the parking lot of the restaurant next door. From there, I took a taxi to the FBI field office. Surveillance 101. Always have a secondary exit strategy. An hour later, I was sitting in Agent Martinez's office, watching her review my case file with the kind of focused attention that had made her one of the Bureau's best investigators. Dorothy, this is incredible work. The pattern analysis alone would take our team weeks to compile. How quickly can you move on it? We can have search warrants for Brennan's office and Jessica's residence within hours, but I need to ask you something difficult. What? How immediate is the threat to your son? I told her about the phone call, about David's supposed chest pains, about Jessica's insistence on handling his medical care alone. Sarah's expression became grim. Dorothy, based on the pattern you've identified, David is in immediate danger. If Jessica follows the same timeline she used with her previous husbands. How long do I have? Hours, maybe less. Sarah picked up her phone. I'm calling for an emergency response team. We're going to find your son and put him in protective custody. And Jessica? We're going to arrest her for conspiracy to commit murder, elder fraud, and about 15 other federal charges. As Sarah coordinated with the tactical team, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a week. Hope. Not just hope for justice, but hope that I could save my son's life. Because while Jessica had been planning her elaborate con for months, she'd made one fatal miscalculation. She'd assumed that her target was a helpless widow with no resources and no expertise. Instead, she'd chosen to victimize a federal agent with 3 decades of experience catching criminals who thought they were too smart to be caught. And now it was time to remind her that no one was smarter than the law. The vulnerable widow performance was over. Special Agent Dorothy Henderson was back on the case, and Jessica was about to learn that some people fight back. The FBI tactical team moved with the kind of precision that comes from years of coordinated operations. Within 3 hours, they had David in protective custody at a federal safe house and search warrants for Jessica's residence, Attorney Brennan's office, and Dr. Wells's clinic. I rode with Agent Martinez to oversee Jessica's arrest. After 32 years of building cases, I wanted to watch this one come together. We found Jessica at the cardiac clinic, sitting in the waiting room with David. She'd dressed for the part, concerned wife in a tasteful sweater, holding her husband's hand while he filled out medical forms. But when our team walked through the clinic doors, something in Jessica's face changed. The mask of concern slipped for just a moment, and I saw what was underneath. Cold calculation and pure rage. She knew. David Henderson? Agent Martinez showed her badge. "We need to speak with you immediately." David looked confused and frightened. "What's going on?" "Sir, we have reason to believe you're in immediate danger. We need to get you to safety." Jessica's grip on David's hand tightened. "Danger from who?" Agent Martinez looked directly at Jessica. "Jennifer Thompson, also known as Jessica Henderson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder fraud, wire fraud, and violation of federal racketeering statutes." The color drained from Jessica's face, but her voice remained steady. "I think there's been some mistake." "No mistake. We have evidence linking you to the murders of Michael Foster and Robert Chen, as well as the systematic fraud targeting elderly victims in this state." David stared at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "Jessica, what are they talking about?" "They're talking about the fact that your wife is a serial killer," I said, stepping forward. "And you were going to be victim number 4. "Mom?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "What's happening?" "Your wife has been planning to kill you for months, honey. Just like she killed her first 2 husbands. Just like she killed your father." "That's insane," Jessica said, but her voice had lost its confident tone. "Richard died of cancer." "Richard died of poison," I replied. "Probably administered through his pain medication over the course of several weeks. You accelerated his death so you could implement your inheritance fraud before anyone could discover what you were doing." Agent Martinez stepped forward with handcuffs. "Jennifer Thompson, you have the right to remain silent." That's when Jessica broke. "You stupid old bitch," she snarled, the mask finally completely gone. "You couldn't just take your monthly allowance and die quietly. You had to keep digging." The gentle, caring daughter-in-law had vanished, replaced by someone whose eyes held nothing but cold hatred. "Did you really think I didn't know who you were? Dorothy Henderson, former FBI forensic accountant? I researched you for months before I married your pathetic son." David looked like he'd been slapped. "Jessica." "Shut up, David. You were never anything but a means to an end, a way to get close to your parents' money." She turned back to me. "But I planned for this. I planned for the possibility that you might figure it out." "The only thing you planned was your own arrest," I said. "Really? Check your house, Dorothy. Check what's happening to your precious evidence files right now." My blood went cold. While we'd been focused on arresting Jessica, her accomplices had been implementing a backup plan. Agent Martinez was already on her radio. "Control, we need units at 1247 Maple Street immediately. Possible break-in in progress." Jessica smiled with genuine satisfaction. "By the time you get back there, every piece of evidence will be destroyed. Your computer, your files, your backup documents. All of it. We have digital copies of everything at the federal building, Agent Martinez said. Do you have copies of the original will? The handwritten note from Richard? The bank statements Dorothy found? Jessica's smile widened. Those were originals, irreplaceable, and right now, they're burning. I felt a moment of panic, but then I remembered something Jessica didn't know. Actually, they're not. What? The documents you're having destroyed are photocopies. I moved the originals to a safety deposit box yesterday morning. The confidence drained from Jessica's face. You're lying. I spent 32 years protecting evidence from people who thought they could destroy it. Did you really think I'd leave the most important documents of my life sitting in an unlocked desk drawer? Agent Martinez was smiling now. Jennifer Thompson, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to destroy federal evidence. That's an additional 5 to 10 years. As they led Jessica away in handcuffs, she turned back to me with pure venom in her eyes. This isn't over, Dorothy. I have lawyers. I have money. I have connections you can't even imagine. Actually, you don't, I replied calmly. While you've been playing house with my son, I've been systematically destroying your entire criminal network. What? Agent Martinez pulled out her phone and showed Jessica a series of photos. Attorney Brennan, arrested 2 hours ago. Dr. Wells, arrested 1 hour ago. Your document forger, Marcus Rivera, arrested 30 minutes ago. Your surveillance team, arrested 15 minutes ago. Jessica's legs seemed to give out. She sagged against the federal agents holding her arms. We have bank records, digital communications, witness testimony, and physical evidence from 16 separate fraud cases, Agent Martinez continued. Your entire organization is finished. David finally found his voice. Jessica, is any of this true? Jessica looked at her husband, the man she'd married with the intention of killing for money, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been genuine emotion cross her face. David, Did you kill my father? The question hung in the air. Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. He was going to die anyway, she said finally. The cancer would have killed him within months. I just accelerated the timeline. David's face went white. You murdered my father. I gave him a peaceful death. Do you know how painful cancer is? I saved him from months of agony. You poisoned him so you could steal his money. I did what was necessary to secure our future. The clinical coldness in her voice was chilling. She genuinely believed that murder was just another business decision. David turned to me with tears streaming down his face. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I'm so sorry I helped her. I wrapped my arms around my son, feeling him shake with grief and shock and relief. You didn't know, honey. She's a professional. She's been doing this for years. How many people did she kill? Agent Martinez consulted her notes. We've identified at least 6 victims over the past 8 years. Michael Foster and Robert Chen were her husbands. The other 4 were elderly clients of Attorney Brennan who died shortly after changing their wills. 6 people. Jessica had murdered 6 people for money. What happens now? David asked. Now she goes to prison for the rest of her life, I said. And we make sure no one else becomes her victim. 3 hours later, we were back at my house, where federal agents were documenting the failed break-in attempt. Jessica's accomplices had indeed tried to destroy my evidence, but they'd only managed to burn photocopies and blank folders. The real evidence was safely stored in 3 different locations, along with digital copies on encrypted federal servers. David sat at my kitchen table, still in shock. I can't believe I married a serial killer. She's very good at what she does, Agent Martinez said. She studied your family for months before making contact. She knew exactly how to position herself as the perfect daughter-in-law. But why me? Why our family? I sat down beside my son. Because we had money, because your father was sick and vulnerable, and because she thought I was just a helpless widow who couldn't fight back. She was wrong about that. David said with something that might have been pride. Very wrong, Agent Martinez agreed. Your mother built one of the most comprehensive criminal cases I've ever seen. The financial analysis alone is going to be studied in law enforcement training programs for years. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Jessica's crimes became clear. She'd been part of a sophisticated criminal organization that targeted wealthy elderly individuals across multiple states. Attorney Brennan's firm had been the legal front, providing fraudulent estate planning services. Dr. Wells had provided psychiatric evaluations to support guardianship proceedings. A network of document forgers, private investigators, and corrupt medical professionals had all played supporting roles. But Jessica had been the key operative, the one who gained intimate access to victims by marrying into families or positioning herself as a caregiver. She'd stolen nearly $12 million over 8 years. She'd murdered at least 6 people, possibly more. And she'd almost gotten away with it. The trial made national news. Federal prosecutors called it the largest inheritance fraud case in the region's history. Jessica was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Attorney Brennan received 35 years. Dr. Wells lost her medical license and received 15 years in federal prison. But for me, the most important moment came 3 months after Jessica's arrest, when David and I were finally able to bury Richard properly. We held a real funeral, not the rushed, controlled event Jessica had orchestrated, but a celebration of Richard's life attended by everyone who'd loved him. We buried him in the plot we'd purchased together, where I could visit him whenever I missed him too much. And instead of the simple headstone Jessica had selected, we installed a beautiful granite memorial that included Richard's favorite quote, "Love is not about how much you say I love you, but how much you prove it every day." David gave a eulogy about his father's integrity, his kindness, and his devotion to family. He also talked about the importance of trusting your instincts, even when others try to convince you you're wrong. "My mother saved my life," he said, looking directly at me. Not just by exposing Jessica's crimes, but by teaching me that love means believing in people, even when they doubt themselves. At the reception afterward, people kept asking me the same question. How did you know? The answer was simple. I'd learned to trust my inner wisdom. Richard's death had been devastating, but it hadn't destroyed my ability to think clearly. Jessica's manipulation had been sophisticated, but it hadn't erased 4 decades of professional experience. David's betrayal had been heartbreaking, but it hadn't eliminated my maternal instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. When people try to rush you into important decisions, there's usually a reason. When someone works to isolate you from your support system, they're usually planning something you wouldn't approve of. Your inner wisdom matters. Your life experience has value. Your instincts deserve respect. And sometimes, the most vulnerable appearing person in the room is actually the most dangerous one to cross. Jessica had called me an old bitch at my husband's funeral. 3 days later, she was on her knees in federal custody, begging for a plea bargain that would never come. Because she'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating a woman who'd spent 32 years proving that justice isn't just an ideal, it's a practice. And some of us have had a lot of practice. 6 months after Jessica's sentencing, I was sitting in Richard's study when David knocked on my door. "Mom, there's someone here to see you." I looked up from the letter I'd been writing to see a woman in her 70s standing nervously in my doorway. "Mrs. Henderson, my name is Margaret Willis. I think I need your help." I invited her to sit down and listened as she told me a story that was becoming heartbreakingly familiar. Her husband had died 3 months ago. Her daughter-in-law had immediately taken charge of funeral arrangements. There was a new will that didn't match what Margaret remembered. Financial accounts were being transferred. A psychiatric evaluation had been suggested to determine her capacity to handle her own affairs. "I found your name in a newspaper article about that woman who tried to steal your husband's estate," Margaret said. "People are saying you help families who are being taken advantage of. I'd helped 12 families in the past 6 months. families where someone was exploiting an elderly member during their most vulnerable time. Sometimes it was adult children stealing from aging parents. Sometimes it was caregivers manipulating their clients. Sometimes it was predators who targeted widows and widowers in the immediate aftermath of loss. Every case was different, but the pattern was always the same: isolation, urgency, and the systematic destruction of the victim's confidence in their own judgment. Margaret, tell me about the will your daughter-in-law found. As she described the suspicious circumstances surrounding her husband's supposed estate planning, I realized we were dealing with another professional operation. The language was too similar to Jessica's case to be coincidental. After Margaret left, I called Agent Martinez. "Sarah, I think we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "I think Jessica's arrest didn't shut down the network. I think it just eliminated one operative." Over the next month, working with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, I helped build a case against what we discovered was a multi-state criminal organization with dozens of operatives like Jessica. The investigation eventually led to the arrest of 43 people and the recovery of over $30 million in stolen assets. But more importantly, it led to the creation of something I never expected to be doing in my retirement: the Henderson Foundation for Elder Protection. Using the money recovered from Jessica's crimes, money that legally belonged to her victims' estates, we established a foundation that provides free legal assistance to elderly people who suspect they're being financially exploited. We also created an education program that teaches seniors and their families how to recognize the warning signs of financial predators. But the most important thing we do is something much simpler. We listen. Because the hardest part of being targeted isn't the financial loss, or even the betrayal. It's the way everyone tells you that your concerns aren't valid, that your memory isn't reliable, that your judgment can't be trusted. The hardest part is being told that your inner wisdom doesn't matter. That's what I want to change. Every week I meet with seniors who've been told they're confused, paranoid, or incompetent. I listen to their stories, I validate their concerns, and I help them understand that their instincts deserve respect. Sometimes their suspicions are correct, and we help them pursue legal action. Sometimes their concerns are unfounded, and we help them find peace of mind. But every time, we start with the same message: your experience matters, your wisdom has value, and you have the right to be heard. David has become the Foundation's legal director. Working on these cases has helped him process his own guilt about how easily Jessica manipulated him. He's become passionate about protecting other families from experiencing what we went through. The hardest thing, he told me recently, was realizing how much I'd started to doubt you. Jessica was so good at making your concerns seem unreasonable that I actually believed you were becoming confused. That's how manipulation works, honey. It makes you question everything, including people you've trusted your whole life. How do you protect yourself against that? You trust your inner wisdom. You pay attention when something feels wrong. You remember that people who love you don't try to isolate you from your support system or rush you into major decisions. And you call your mother when your wife starts suggesting psychiatric evaluations, David added with a rueful smile. The Foundation has helped over 200 families in the past 2 years. We've recovered millions of dollars in stolen assets. We've exposed corrupt lawyers, doctors, and financial advisors. We've sent dozens of financial predators to prison. But the work that means the most to me happens in my living room every Tuesday evening when I host a support group for seniors who've been targeted by financial predators. We sit in a circle, drinking tea and sharing stories about the people who tried to take advantage of us. We talk about the warning signs we missed and the instincts we ignored. We celebrate the victories and support each other through the ongoing legal battles. Most importantly, we remind each other that surviving an attack by a financial predator isn't a sign of weakness. It's proof of strength. Because predators don't target weak people. They target people who have something worth stealing. They target people who've built successful lives, accumulated assets, and earned the love and respect of their families. they target people like us. Last Tuesday, a new member joined our group. Her name was Helen, and she was 82 years old. Her grandson had been stealing from her for 3 years, using her dementia diagnosis to justify taking control of her finances. "I feel so stupid," she said, tears streaming down her face. "How did I let this happen?" I reached over and took her hand. "Helen, you didn't let anything happen. Someone you trusted chose to betray that trust. That's not your fault. It's theirs. But everyone keeps telling me I should have known better." "Everyone is wrong," said Margaret Willis, the woman who'd first come to me for help 6 months ago. "You survived. You got help. You fought back. That makes you a warrior, not a victim." Around the circle, other heads nodded. Women and men who'd been told they were confused, paranoid, or incompetent, but who'd had the courage to trust their instincts and seek help. "What's the hardest lesson you've learned about people?" I asked Helen. She thought for a moment. "That the people closest to you can hurt you the most, but also that there are people who will help you fight back." That's the question I ask everyone who comes to the foundation. What's the hardest lesson you've learned about people? Because wisdom isn't just about recognizing danger. It's about recognizing help when it comes. It's about understanding that trusting the wrong person doesn't mean you should stop trusting anyone. It's about learning that being betrayed by family doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. And it's about discovering that sometimes the people who seem most vulnerable are actually the ones with the most fight left in them. Jessica called me an old bitch at my husband's funeral because she thought I was weak, confused, and helpless. She was wrong on all counts. But she was especially wrong about the helpless part. Because after 32 years of catching criminals who thought they were too smart to be caught, I'd learned something that Jessica never understood. Justice isn't just an ideal. It's a practice, and some of us have had a lot of practice. Your inner wisdom matters. Your life experience has value. Your instincts deserve respect. And when someone tries to convince you otherwise, that's usually the person you need to be most careful about. Trust yourself. Fight back. And remember that you're never too old to teach someone a lesson they'll never forget. What's the hardest lesson you've learned about people? Share your wisdom, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Real recognize real. And we're all stronger than they think.